Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Nick White, and I work at Silkworm Social. We are pleased to have you here with us today. We are going to be talking to some influencers about how to put together a third-party, how to gain the endorsement of third-party influencers, get their attention, gain their endorsement and active, enthusiastic participation, and help to set yourself up for a positive experience thereafter. So we'll get started. Just a brief word about who we are. We're Silkworm Social, and we specialize in bringing influencers and brands together to create great content and give the audiences the content that they're looking for. And we're doing this in conjunction with Group High, which is a great influencer measurement and identification tool. So we want to say thank you to them for their assistance with this program. And as I said, my name is Nick White, and we're joined as well by Kristen Matthews from Group High. But that's not why you're here. You're actually here to hear from our influencer panelists, Amanda Sanchez and Merrick White. They're going to tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll dive into the actual seminar itself. So Amanda, would you please start?
Sure, yeah, this is Amanda Sanchez. Thanks for having me, Nick, as part of the webinar. So I write the blog Little Miss Fearless. I've been blogging for about 3.5 years, and I started primarily as just a personal style, outfit, inspiration type blog, and my content since I began has evolved into fitness as well as motherhood, which is a recent and something that I wish I would have started from the beginning, but have really honed it on in the past year or so, is talking about my fears, and that's what I call my self-talk series. It's a kind of a conversation opportunity with my readers where I may be expose in a conversational way and really get to know them through my content. So in a nutshell, that is me.
Great. And Merrick, could you tell us a little bit about yourself as well, please?
Yes, thanks for having me as well, Nick. My name is Merrick White, and I'm the blogger behind Merrick's Art. I started my blog a little over 8 years ago, actually, when I was in college getting my degree in fine arts. And my mom asked me to start my blog so that I could post my paintings that I was working on in school so she could see them, since I lived out of state. Now, fast forward a couple of years, and I was a stay-at-home mom with my first little boy, and I started sewing in my free time. And I did a refashion project where I took one of my husband's old shirts and turned it into a women's blouse for me. And this was right around the time that Pinterest was starting. And I posted this refashion on my blog, and it started getting pinned like crazy. And I was getting huge amount of traffics to my little tiny blog. And people were asking me, are you on Twitter? Do you have a Facebook page for your blog? I want to follow you on these platforms. And I'd do a little Googling and a quick setup, and I'd respond, well, I do now. And I just learned as I went. Google was my very best friend for those few years as I completely flew by the seat of my pants and learned how to be a blogger. And now, 6 years later, I'm a mom of 3 little boys. We live in Southern California, and I don't paint at all anymore, but I blog full-time about style, sewing, and our family.
Great. We're really pleased to have the two of you with us today. Thank you for your time. And I look forward to hearing your insights about what it's like when you're engaged by a brand or an agency and that goes well, so that we can provide a good example for everybody else who's out there in the audience today. So we'll talk a little bit about what we're here to discuss today is how to identify, enlist, or recruit and execute with influential third-party voices so that you can get your brand or your product or your service message across. And we're going to hear what that looks like from those third parties themselves, from Amanda and Merrick. But a little bit of setting the stage first. We're talking about influencer marketing, and influencer marketing is is a component of a broader marketing strategy. So we're just going to take it on assumption that you understand that, and that you have to have a solid marketing strategy first before you can even attempt to spin that off into influencer marketing in that specific direction. And we're going to assume that you understand that means you have to have clearly defined objectives and success metrics for those objectives. You know what your budget and your timing is, your action plan, and really what you're trying to accomplish. And all of that is the basis for influencer marketing, which really kind of takes a very similar approach, but a specialized one at the same time. And to the components that go into setting up and executing a good influencer marketing strategy program are really threefold. They're the identification, getting the right people, finding the right people who are going to reach your audience, who have influence, persuasion, sway with that audience, can compel those buyers or potential buyers to do what you're looking to get them to do. And they can do so in a credible way. And that really comes down to making sure you're working with the right people. This is, you can't stress enough, and it's probably very obvious, that if you get the wrong people in the program, you're not going to get the results that you're after. So it's really critical to be able to identify and then to be able to enlist them, and that's the next step. To enlist them, to get their attention and sustain their attention, you have to know a bit about who they are, what motivates them, what is going to get them to take the actions that you hope they will take, so that they can then prompt the actions that you hope your prospective buyer base will take. And that means that you have to put together, at its essence, a mutually beneficial offer that they're going to adhere to, that they're going to buy into, and even perhaps to improve or augment themselves with their own ideas. And then once you've got all that in place, it's actually time to get to work, roll up your sleeves, and execute. And the influencers, in a lot of ways, are envoys of your customers. In some ways, you could think of them as your best customers. So consequently, you're only as good as your execution. And that is a critical piece. Strategy is one thing, and having a good plan, but if you fail to execute on it, then it's all for naught. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of that, the mechanics of what it looks like, and really get these gals, Amanda and Merrick's perspectives of what that looks like when it's done well, and also maybe some contrasting points of what maybe are some practices that you might want to avoid. So let's talk a little bit about selection, getting the right people, the right voices to reach the right audience, your prospective buyer base. And so you need to know who those folks are. You need to have an identification tool or ways to identify those people. And then you need to, it's very important to understand that those people are individuals. You need to identify them and approach them individually, because they're motivated by different things. In some cases, it could be, it's not limited to what's on this list, but some things to consider would be an equitable value exchange. Are they going to get out of it as much as you are going to get out of it as a brand or an agency? Are they looking for a relationship to build upon over the long term? Are they looking for cross-promotion to perhaps raise their profile? Are they looking for a unique experience that's going to set them apart from peer bloggers that wouldn't have access to those unique experiences? So Amanda and Merrick, could you perhaps maybe select one of those from the list and talk about what motivates you? Or maybe there's something that's not even on that list. What motivates you to do what it is you do, and how, when a brand or an agency approaches you and understands that motivation, that it's a great way to engage you, to get your attention and keep it.
This is Merrick, and I think that the biggest thing for me is, a lot of emails come in every single day, and it's very obvious to me when brands have done their homework and their initial outreach is very personal and specific. I just had a baby 2 months ago, and when they reference that and congratulate me, or compliment me on my children in some way, or reference a recent blog post and say how it helped them get dressed last week, or whatever it is, something very specific and personal, that instantly catches my attention and makes me more interested. With the amount of emails that come into my inbox, it's impossible to respond to each one personally or work with every single brand that comes in. And so the ones that have clearly done their homework are the ones that instantly grab my attention and make me more interested in working with them. And that's not always to say that the ones that have done their homework are the best fit for my brand. And I do have to say, no, it's not a great fit sometimes, but that will instantly catch my attention if they've obviously done their homework and they're specific. And along with that, so many of the emails that come in, the introduction just says hi there or hello, and they don't say my name specifically. And whether it's a mass email or not, it feels like a mass email to me because they haven't referenced me or addressed me specifically. And so those little things, just saying my name, hi Merrick, how are you today, and whatever it is, and then start on your email, that makes a big difference in just the initial way that I feel about that brand from the get-go.
Yeah, Merrick, I would agree with that completely. I think it's funny the number of emails I've received where it said, hello, Little Miss Fearless, as if I go around talking about myself to people as Little Miss Fearless. But yeah, being personalized, shows that they've kind of taken that extra step and being familiar with, with the content that I put out there. And I think one thing with a lot of bloggers, especially when it comes to, style blogs, which, there are a number of out there and growing every year, there are more and more, there's more saturation with that. I think, there's still, each blogger has something that sets them apart. And it's important for the brands to be able to identify that, 1 to 3 things that maybe sets a personal style blogger apart from everybody else, and then honing in on that in their email, so that it's obvious that that they've done their homework and that they've found a way to connect, like Merrick said, either with a previous blog post or something that's going on in your life, currently that you've maybe been sharing with your readers. All of those things showing that they've been paying attention to you and not just picked you off of a list and added you to their email blast. Makes a big difference. And one thing I wanted to reference on the relationship building bullet point there is an experience that I had with a brand. I worked with a few years ago, and it was a sponsored campaign, and then the relationship didn't necessarily die, but I didn't continue to work with them. But just a couple months ago, they came back around with an opportunity to showcase some new styles that were hitting their shelves, and it was not a sponsored opportunity, but because I'd had a good experience with them in the past, I was interested and willing to do another blog post and kind of social promotion of their brand for product exchange only. But then one thing that kind of came back around that again proved the value of that relationship for me was after I had done all the work for that campaign and posted my content, I had interacted with the brand on their Instagram platform and commented on a photo of a dress that I really liked. And then a week later, they had sent it to me in the mail with a note that said, we noticed that you really liked this dress. We hope you'll enjoy it in your closet. And again, like this was, the kind of the resurfacing of a relationship with a brand, and there was no monetary compensation, but the fact that they treated me so well and paid attention to me and were aware that I was interacting with them, on their social platforms, just went a long way for me. And now I have, even more interest in kind of sharing how highly I think of this brand just because they treated me so well as a customer.
That's really interesting. It's clear that if they do their homework, that's one thing, but treating you like an individual, it doesn't do any good to lump Merrick and Amanda into the same category because you're two individuals and two different things that drive you. And it really comes down to, in a lot of ways, doing the little things, which is extraordinarily hard in the environment that we have right now, is to get to know people in that fashion. But at the same time, it sounds like it really pays dividends in the end.
Absolutely.
So let's think a little bit more about influencer selection. One of the pieces of advice that we give is to conceptualize who would be your ideal third-party candidate. Most brands or firms are really good at at identifying their ideal customer. If influencers are kind of the pivot point between the customer and the brand, then it's necessary to take that one step further and figure out who that ideal third-party advocate would be, and really put yourself in her shoes. Maybe you can give us some examples, either or both of you, about demonstrating the knowing who you are and consequently getting your attention and sustaining your attention by having demonstrated that a brand or an agency really knows who you are as individuals.
Yeah, this is Amanda. Unfortunately, one of the first examples that comes to mind is the opposite of that, a brand that showed that they didn't actually really know who I was. But before I share that, I'll just say, it kind of goes back to what Merrick and I were saying with, the approach in the pitch, as well as just, not just doing the homework, but, reading. I mean, it's so, I feel like it's so easy for brands to get to know their influencers these days because, everything that we're putting out there is out there. I mean, you have somewhere to go to learn more about us, and, whether it's our social channels or our blog or, wherever we're sharing about our lives and our passions, it's very easy for brands to find that information, and doesn't take very long either to pick something out to really understand what's unique about this influencer. But the example I'll share that's kind of the opposite of that was last fall I had the opportunity to work on a campaign with a brand that that I was really excited about, a brand that's pretty well known, and we went through the whole process of identifying the details and the timing, and they had sent product out to me and everything, and then I created the content and was ready to post it, but sent it to them for approval. And it turned out that they weren't thrilled that in the photos where I was styling some clothing that I was pregnant because their target audience was college females. And I guess that sort of was just maybe something that a specific detail that they didn't communicate to me, but I also couldn't help the fact that I was showing. So it was kind of this awkward experience with the brand where I felt like, it's very obvious that I'm pregnant, so it made me feel like they didn't, they A, didn't do their homework, but B, clearly didn't know who I was or what was going on in my life and what I was blogging about or sharing with my followers, because that was something very, very prevalent. And then it sort of presented itself in this campaign as an issue and something that I had to try to hide, even though it wasn't very easy to hide. And anyway, we made it work, but it was, I would say that's a good example of where I felt like it was very obvious, who I was, and easy for them to put themselves in my shoes and understand like what I was passionate about, what's going on in my life right now, and yet they kind of missed the mark on it completely.
Awkward.
Yeah, just a little bit.
On the flip side, on my end, I have 3 little boys, as I mentioned, and when brands reach out to me and specifically offer product for my children and for me so that we can do kind of a mommy and me or family kind of style, excuse me, I really appreciate that, because I've been trying to incorporate more of that into my blog, because I feel like it feels the most natural for me, and I love including my children and kind of having these experiences together and creating beautiful content with it. And so when they mention that specifically and give me the opportunity to do campaigns with my children, I instantly appreciate that and respond really positively to that. And so, and not to say that I always have to do that, but for them to kind of go above and beyond and say, let's include your children in this, would you feel comfortable with that? I love that. And then also on the flip side, brands that come to me with evening wear or something like that, obviously they have not done their homework, because if they looked at my blog, they would see me wearing jeans and a t-shirt and tennis shoes on my blog with my kids at the park, and I'm not going to be wearing a ball gown, the next day. So, to make sure that your content is relevant, there's absolutely a market for evening wear for some bloggers, but it's not me. And so it's important to make sure that you find your target audience and choose a blogger that fits that, because as Nick said, the influencer is your best customer, and their readers are going to be their best customers. And so if you can fit the aesthetic of the influencer, then that is what's going to sell your product.
Well said. Well, thank you both. There's two other points on this slide that we'd like to perhaps pivot towards a little bit. One is kind of stems from having a clear understanding of the individual and her motivations, and that's the ability to put together a compelling and mutually beneficial pitch. So if you're going to put together a program, there's really got to be something in it for her. Otherwise, you're not even going to get her attention, let alone keep her active and get the results that you want ultimately in terms of content and motivation for her audience. And then there's also the point that it's really easy in this day and age to boil things down to metrics, because I think that's just a human tendency, but unfortunately there's a lot of fallacies that can be included in those numbers, and ultimately when we're, as Silkworm, identifying influencers, metrics are only one. They're not an insignificant part, but they are only one of many different criteria that we look at, because those numbers say very little oftentimes in terms of true influence. So both those are two different topics, but what would either of you like to say on either of those? We'd like to hear your perspective.
As far as a compelling and mutually beneficial offer, I think it's, I mean, we keep saying this over and over again, but doing your homework and recognizing what the blogger is worth before you come up with an offer, because when emails come into me and they have everything already outlined and say this is what we're willing to offer you, and it is so low and the requests are so high, the pay is so low, whatever it is, it's offensive to me as a blogger who, you know, really works very hard to produce great content day after day, and I put a lot of time and effort and my own money into this to hire a photographer and have relevant style and all of these things, and so when they say, you know, we want you to do this and this and this, and they have a list of 5 things that they want me to include in my blog post. Oh, just make or do 3 outfits, no problem, and then we're going to pay you this much, and it's just, or we'll do it in exchange for a gift card or whatever it is. It's offensive to me as a blogger, and I don't want to sound high and mighty or hoity-toity or whatever it is, but you have to recognize as a brand and a PR company that bloggers and influencers are worth it. You know, this is, your marketing dollars are going to something that is tangible, and the result, you can see the results, and so I think that when you're putting together your offer, make sure that you do your homework and see what this blogger is worth, to make sure that as you reach out, it's not instantly deleted from their inbox because it's just such an outrageous offer with outrageous expectations and very little return for the influencer.
Yeah, I'd love to just add to that too. I mean, I think, you know, what Merrick's saying goes right back to putting yourself in the blogger's shoes too, like really understanding what, you know, what the influencer has to do to create the content and the work that goes into it, whether, you know, it's the time and or their own money just to pull off the requests of the brand. But then also, you know, when it comes to, you know, doing your homework and really understanding the value that the influencer brings outside of just their, you know, their metrics and their numbers and their analytics, is looking at the relationship that they have with their readers in very obvious ways. I mean, it's more than just reading, you know, blog posts and looking at Instagram photos to get a sense for what the blogger or what this, you know, influencer does. It's reading, you know, the comments from their followers on Instagram or on the blog, and seeing, you know, their engagement with them. What kind of conversations are they having? Is this influencer actually responding to their followers' questions? And I think there's a lot that a brand can learn just just through being aware of those types of conversations and can get a sense for the influence that, that this person has and the relationship that they have with their followers and their readers, and if it's real or not. And all of that can kind of add, a tangible feel, I guess, or some realness to the metrics that they might otherwise, be focused in on. So.
Well, and in response to your second or your third point there, look beyond reach metrics alone. I've thought kind of a lot about this and thought about my progression as a blogger, now blogging for 8 years and pretty seriously for a little over 5. And I think about the collaborations that came in back at the beginning when my numbers were so much lower, and I was willing to do it for a much smaller fee at that point because I recognized that my numbers were lower, but because these brands trusted me with a collaboration, I went above and beyond for those collaborations to make sure that I produce my best content and really impress the brand. And so I think, sometimes the PR companies, the brands look at the numbers alone and they think we want to reach out to the biggest bloggers and because they're going to have the biggest reach, but at the same time there's a few benefits in reaching out and spreading your marketing dollars over bloggers of different sizes. If you reach out to the very biggest bloggers, they're going to require the largest compensation, and you could spend your entire marketing budget just on 1 or 2 bloggers. Whereas if you spread it over multiple bloggers, those smaller bloggers will have a smaller fee, and you can reach more people. And I think that legitimizes your brand as the content is put in front of their audiences multiple times, because these readers that I have are following multiple fashion bloggers, and so if they see your content or your brand popping up on all these different influencers that they follow, that's going to make them more likely to buy and to respond to your brand rather than one blogger promoting it and it shows up one time and then they might forget about it.
That's a really good point that you make about kind of spreading it out and not going for the top in terms of metrics, which kind of flies in the face of, like I said earlier, it's really easy to boil things down to numbers, but those numbers can only ever tell you so much. And at the same time, the higher the numbers, the bigger the impact to your budget. What we've seen in the past is that, yeah, everybody wants to be associated with those household names, so to speak, but your budget's only ever going to go so far. So if you bring in people who are smaller, perhaps leagues, whatever sort of analogy you want to use, comers, they want to be associated with those people too. And those folks who are really huge oftentimes can't go nearly as deep or express the same level of enthusiasm because there are just so many demands on their time that they have to meet the needs of their audience. Whereas if you work with the smaller folks, then you can extract a lot more value out of that. But again, it requires a real close-knit relationship. It requires actually working with these people to transaction.
Well, and to go along with Amanda's point as well, those smaller bloggers often have a much better relationship with their readers than the bigger bloggers. I see influencers on social media that have hundreds of thousands of followers, and they just can't respond to their audience in the same way that somebody with a smaller audience can respond, because there's just, like you said, Nick, so much demand on their time, and how do you respond to thousands of comments? It's not possible. And so I think that the trust is there with the smaller bloggers more than it is with the bigger bloggers. And so I think that it's beneficial to legitimize your content or your brand by reaching out to those household names, like you said, but don't spend your entire marketing budget on them. Spread it out through a range of bloggers so that you get the most bang for your buck.
Excellent. Yeah, and so we kind of get into a little bit more. We've talked a lot about mutual benefit. You really have to know who you're talking to, and you have to know what motivates her. And that's going to be an individual, oftentimes an individual situation with each given person. But beyond that, there are a lot of opportunities that the better you know somebody, it's just like out in the real world, the more opportunities it can open up. And so we've got a list here of ways to put together what we think is the perfect pitch. And this has been crafted over time with trial and error. We've made plenty of the latter, but we've learned the hard way what really works. And one of the things that we've kind of started approaching as a theme through this discussion is collaboration. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that's like if a brand approaches you and they have a really rigid set of ideas and approach, and your input is not solicited or welcome, versus what it's like when you're really able to roll up your sleeves and make a campaign your own, and how that sets you up for the next time around.
This is Amanda. So I mean, gosh, wow, it makes such a difference when a brand is open to feedback, and it really is puzzling when they're not, because, you know, when it comes to reaching an audience in a real way, I mean, there's no one who knows their audience better than the influencer, right? And so, you know, I've had an experience with a brand that I was really excited about. It was, you know, a product review, and I received the product, actually really, really loved it, was excited to do the blog post and share it with followers. And when it came time to, you know, review the final details of things that the brand wanted covered in the post, they started to get very nitpicky and micromanaging almost to down to the very detail of specific words they wanted me to use, and a word count for my blog post, and just things that, you know, when I've had experiences with brands where it's been more where there's been more give and take and it's been more mutually beneficial, you know, those are things that you just start to feel like, you know, the brand is trying to push their advertising messaging on your audience and trying to put words in your mouth. And it, you know, if it doesn't feel real and genuine to me to put those words down, you know, in a blog post review or share those with my readers, then, you know, for sure my audience and my readers are not going to receive it in an authentic way either. And you know, I think there's something to be said for brands wanting to provide messaging guidelines, or, you know, kind of a wish list of things that they want the influencer to share about their product, or, you know, things to just highlight or keep in mind. But I don't think a brand is doing themselves any favors by trying to control the messaging, or, you know, provide so many guidelines that they're taking away the authenticity of, you know, the influencer's actual experience with the product or the brand. So those are some things that I would just caution, you know, brands to watch out for as they're approaching an influencer. But then on the flip side of that, when, you know, when a collaboration is a good fit and it goes really well, it really is, it becomes, you know, it becomes a real relationship, and it's not just a brand paying me as if I'm just a distribution channel, you know, sharing content that's not real or authentic. It again goes back to approaching me as a real person, building a relationship with me, and then together us finding ways to reach my audience in, you know, in different, you know, whether it's different times of the year, and kind of planning a campaign across several months and different touch points to make sure that we're reaching the audience more than once. But then also kind of brainstorming and sharing ideas around what, you know, what I think would be a great way to reach my audience, and, you know, the brand being receptive to that because I know my audience really well. But then also if they have ideas or things that have worked well for them with influencers in the past, you know, it's important for me as an influencer to be open to those as well, because there may be new things I haven't tried that my audience could be receptive to as well. So, you know, kind of goes both ways, I guess, on the different ways to approach that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that Amanda said. And, you know, as she said, the most successful collaborations are the ones where they allow for me to use my creativity. I worked with a brand last year, and it was a shoe brand, and they wanted to promote their fall line, and they said, here are two choices of shoes that you can choose from. Which one do you want to style? And neither of them really fit my aesthetic. And so I came back to them and said, you know, is there anything else? I went and looked through their website and I said, you know, there's 5 other shoes that I would really prefer to style. Is there any way we can expand this number of choices here? And they were very firm in which ones they wanted to promote and wouldn't budge at all. And so we ended up promoting one of them, and I made it work. But you know, when you kind of make it so specific and don't let me as an influencer have creativity and have some say in what you're promoting, it can come across as very sponsored, and readers don't respond as well to that. When you trust me as an influencer, I know my audience, like Amanda said. The influencers know their audiences better than anybody, and if you trust us, we will sell your product for you. But you have to trust us, and if I come back and say this is not a good fit for me, take that as feedback and say, you know, let's step back and see what we can do to make this work, because I think that the best collaborations are the ones that it's a natural fit, and it's something that I would wear normally, and it's not going to stick out like a sore sponsored thumb.
That
Great,
one
thanks
other
for-
thing I would. Oh,
go
sorry,
ahead,
Nick.
please.
Yeah, no, just one other thing that that reminded me of as Merrick was talking. Merrick and I actually met at an influencer conference last year, and I remember at one of the sessions, you know, talking. We're in a room filled with hundreds of other influencers, and you know, something came up about the idea of if a brand approaches you to do a collaboration and they don't offer you any, you know, any compensation for it, would you still do it? And if your answer to that is yes, then you know it's a natural fit. And of course, that's not going to happen 100% of the time. And a lot of times, influencers, we do make it work. You know, a lot of us are trying to make a living off of our blogs, and so, you know, there definitely is some compromise there. But I would say, like Merrick said, if it's a natural fit, it'll be obvious, and any of the feedback that an influencer would provide in terms of what's going to work best for their audience or what fits their style the best, to make sure that, you know, whether it's sponsored or not, that content is as genuine and authentic as it can be, is, you know, great feedback for a brand that should certainly not go unnoticed.
That's great insight from the two of you. Thank you. It's we've talked about the identification and then enlistment or recruitment, but none of that really matters if you can't execute at the same time. So we've the conversation is kind of headed in that direction. I'd like to talk a little bit. We've gotten some questions from the audience, and they're quite interesting. But before we move to that, I'd like to close with a few of your thoughts on execution. Maybe you can give us some examples of when a campaign was extraordinary, made it easy for you, or perhaps a contrasting example of when the brand or the agency kind of got in your way and kept you from doing some of your best work.
This is Merrick, and I'm actually currently working with a brand that it's the bad example here, not buttoned up, and it's very frustrating for me as the influencer. You know, I spend a lot of time on the creative side of it, coming up with a concept and then photographing and all that stuff, and then usually it's a day or two before that I go to my blog and write the content. You know, I have the ideas floating in my head, but you know, actually write it down. And at that point, I go back and reference our contract or emails that have all of the checklists outlined, and I make sure that what I'm writing fulfills all of those things, and I make notes on what social media promotion needs to happen and all that, and what hashtags are required and links and everything. And when it's all over the place in different emails, it is so confusing and frustrating for me, and things can fall through the cracks, especially if the contract was written or the agreement was made a month or two previously. You know, there's so many things coming in that I have a hard time remembering exactly what we discussed, and so that it's very important that everything is right in one place for me to easily reference. And this example that I mentioned is that they outlined a contract, and I signed the contract, and so I went back and referenced the contract, and it turned out that the social media handles within the contract that were outlined were incorrect, and then they'd sent me an email later on that said, here are updated social media handles. And so then, you know, 2 months later, when I go to write my post, I go back and reference the contract, not remembering that they'd sent this follow-up email with the updated handles. And you know, there's no reference in the original emails that there was a second email, and so that fell through the cracks. And so then when I posted, they said, well, you've done the wrong handles, and you know, sent me this email that they had sent before. And so, you know, that's frustrating for me as an influencer. You know, I'm trying to produce as much content as I can and do my very best, but things do fall through the cracks if not everything is in one place where it's easy to reference. So I guess the lesson from this that you can take away from it is that, you know, when you write the contract or when you make the agreement, keep it all in one email chain, or keep it all in one contract. Double check everything to make sure that everything is accurate and everything that you expect of the influencer is all in one place, so that it's easy to reference for the influencer, because that time passes and so many other things are going on. Me as a mom of little kids, you know, there's a lot going on in my head all at once from day to day. And so if we agree on something months beforehand, those little extra things that are not all in one place I'm not going to remember them. And so it's important to have it all in one place, have everything accurate, to make sure that what you want me to accomplish is accurately portrayed.
I would agree with everything Merrick just said. I think there are a lot of details of things that go into, you know, a campaign on the influencer side as well as on the brand side, with the wish list and kind of a checklist of things they want included. And it's so helpful to have all of that stuff, you know, considered and captured in, you know, a document, of whether it's an agreement or, you know, an email or whatever. But just having it in one place, like Merrick said, makes it easy as you're going back to make sure you're capturing everything and getting the most up-to-date, you know, information from the brand. And I kind of mentioned this example already, but I had, you know, a sour experience too with a brand that approached this, you know, in a different way, with asking for a bunch of things up front, and we kind of captured it in the agreement. But then when I went through the trouble of putting the content together and working with a photographer, you know, and sent everything over for approval before I published it, it was almost as if things had been changed on there, and they wanted, you know, additional, you know, 3 more sentences in my blog post, or specific words to be used, or they wanted the photos to highlight a specific use of the product, and I was highlighting a different use of the product. And anyway, just I think addressing all those things up front to make it easy for the influencer, given that, you know, there is time and other things that go into creating the content in terms of, you know, hiring a photographer and bringing in other people to help pull the content together. You know, it can be a hassle to have to go through and do it all again if something is missed, or, you know, doesn't fit the expectations of the brand because it wasn't identified from the get-go.
Interesting. So here's a question for you. Do you, it sounds like in both of those scenarios you were working directly with the brand as opposed to through an agency who could kind of buffer that process for you. Do you work with an agency, or is that, do you find that to be helpful or a hindrance to your process?
It's this is Merrick, and it's absolutely a huge help for me. You know, working with the brand directly is something that I've done, you know, with blogging for so many years. I've kind of seen the entire spectrum of when PR companies and brands were brand new at this, bloggers were brand new at this, we had no idea what we were doing, we're working just back and forth, and everything was kind of all over the place. And now, you know, as I work with different agencies, they do all the legwork behind there, that is hugely beneficial for me because I'm the creative person. I don't want to be bogged down with all the details, and when I am, it's frustrating for me, and it kind of gets in the way of the creative process. And so having an agency is, you know, if you're a brand that's not working with an agency, I recommend that you do, because they're the ones that can go back and forth between you and the influencer to make sure that all of these things are buttoned up very well, and that everything that you want to, you know, your messaging that you want to convey to our audience, you know, figure out what that is and make sure that that's all written in the contract, and everything that you want highlighted, and all the social shares and all of those things. Make sure that that checklist, you put exactly what you want on that, and the PR company should, or the PR agency should help with that. And then it's helpful for me, you know, when my agencies come to me with a contract and say, here's what's expected, here's the dates, tell us what date you're going to post it, here's what's expected, here's the messaging, and it's all in one place. It's so helpful for me, because then everything is all in one place for me to just reference easily when I'm ready to produce, or when I'm ready to write out the content, and it makes sure that nothing is falling through the cracks.
This is Amanda. I also work with an agency, but you know, for a number of years I didn't. So I've experienced both sides of working directly with a brand, and as well as having an agency do the go-between. And I do think it's a huge help to have, you know, that extra person to keep track of the details and kind of do the back and forth, as Merrick said. But it's funny, you know, I often think of these working relationships with brands as dating relationships. And you know, a brand you know, approaching an influencer directly. I mean, when I, you know, look at the point of allowing for adequate time, you know, for a program to be executed well. I mean, if you're going to reach out to an influencer and you've, you know, gone through the work of identifying who they are and making sure they're a fit for your brand, you know, you want to reach out to them, but then also make sure you're responding when they get back to you. And, you know, you wouldn't ask someone out on a date, and then when they get back to you and say yes, you know, like not ever go out on the date or plan the details. So, you know, those are some things that certainly having an agency in between helps. You know, but I also, when you insert the agency, I think of them as kind of the wingman. It's the, you know, the asking someone out through a friend, and, you know, would your friend go out with me, and would they do all of these things, and, you know, would this be a fun date? And I think sometimes that just puts it in perspective, so that you're remembering that who you're working with is a real person, and that whether you're working through an agency or not, you know, or going directly to the influencer, that you're interacting with them in a real way, and being personable and being considerate, and, you know, making sure that you both are getting what you want out of the relationship. And in order to do that, you have to be, you know, open and having those conversations and addressing the details and fixing things when something doesn't go right, but just, you know, all throughout the whole process being considerate of each other's time, and I think that will help it go smoothly.
You know, and along with that, you know, when the PR agency is the one going in between, and so I don't have a direct relationship with the brand, I think the best way that I've seen that the brand makes sure that you still have that relationship and it's not lost is by interacting on social media, for one, with cross-promotion and also commenting. I really appreciate that when I produce content and then the brand directly responds and says, we love this, your son is so beautiful, or, you know, whatever it is, some kind of personal interaction there, that even though I'm not the one that was doing the back and forth with them to set up the collaboration, they still make an effort to reach out and specifically comment on the content that I've produced. And also another thing that kind of goes above and beyond is when they send product or gifts or something on top of the collaboration, where they say, you know, thanks so much for the promotion, the collaboration that we did, and here's an extra little something from our shop, or here's a little something for your baby, or here's a little treat, or whatever it is, that kind of sets up that relationship where I think, you know, they really do care about me as an influencer and care about me as a person, even though I'm not the one that specifically set up the collaboration and was emailing them back and forth.
That's a really good point. Essentially what they're doing is they're solidifying the relationship for the next time that there's an engagement. And so it's so easy. We see it oftentimes where you outline the expectations and then you two produce the content and then that's it. And everybody goes dark for a while. And that really is not how a relationship, you wouldn't operate that way socially in your personal life. So social media kind of requires some of those protocols that be observed. So thanks a lot. This is really great. We've gotten a lot of good questions from our audience. There's a couple I'd like to toss out here. And because we're talking about having an agency as an intermediary, this might be relevant to that. We have some folks who ask, Lauren in particular, how do you set your rates and how do you communicate those? And I'm sure that's a different answer depending on whether you have an agency in between or not. But how do you go about doing that? We don't need to get into numbers, but how does that work?
This is Amanda. You know, I remember early on when I started charging for blog posts, this was before working with an agency, a lot of it was kind of, you know, talking to other bloggers and getting a sense for, well, what are you charging, and kind of comparing numbers and metrics and audience sizes. And, you know, one thing that helped when I first started was just identifying a number that I thought sounded right based on the value that I thought that I would bring, and then going with it. And sometimes a brand, you know, sometimes a brand would take it and sometimes they wouldn't. And that feedback, that process of getting, you know, some people wanting to move forward and some brands saying, nope, that doesn't fit, you know, with what our budget is. You know, all of that feedback is then what kind of helps course correct moving forward and deciding like, okay, this number is working and no, this number is not. And I think once I, you know, got to the point where I had a big enough reach and enough volume of requests coming in where it was helpful to bring in an agency, they then kind of helped build on that. And I had at least a track record of what I had been charging and, you know, what seemed to be working well, but then the agency came in and had some additional, you know, insight and tools to be able to say, okay, let's take that and build on it and really identify your full value and look at this from different perspectives. You know, you have a value of you know, the audience that you reach on your blog, but then you also have these social channels and a different audience there, and kind of breaking it up, because a lot of times as we see now, you know, collaborations come in different forms and different sizes and different you know, different packages, and sometimes the brand really just wants to reach your blog audience, and sometimes they only want to reach your Instagram audience. And so having an agency kind of help identify the different value and the different reach that you have across the different platforms and touch points is a huge help in kind of, you know, coming down to a final number, you know, that works as you move forward to work on collaborations.
Along with that, I think that Amanda's points are all great, and I've done the same thing as I've grown over the years. And just to kind of add on to that, I think that it's important as brands and agencies to recognize that we as bloggers and influencers are trying to grow as much as we can, and as we grow, we will increase our rates because it's just more demands on our time, and we're worth more, we're reaching a greater audience and all that. And so, you know, kind of one bad example is that, you know, when a company reaches out to me and we do a collaboration and we decide on a rate, then they'll sometimes reach out a year or so later and expect to pay the same amount. And realistically, that's just not possible, because my blog continues to grow, my social media channels continue to grow, and my compensation has to grow along with that. So just expect that as time goes on, that rates will go up if you want to continue a relationship, and it can be damaging to the relationship if you don't recognize what the influencer is worth and expect to pay them the same thing you did several years ago.
Really good point, right? That it's all wrapped up in the term influencer. So if you are truly influential, then there's a cost associated with that. You get what you pay for in this world.
Right.
I'm sure you two see that quite a bit. I'd like to pivot a little bit away from this topic thus far. We had a really interesting question from, where was it here? from Fiona, who asked, do either of you have experience working with, not with physical products, but with services? And how is that a different experience for you? Can you give some insight into how that differs?
Yeah, this is Amanda. I'm trying to think of some examples. I'm sure I have. I mean, I think sometimes it just depends, or at least in an experience that I've had where it's still somewhat of a product, but it's, you know, a services product, I guess. It's mostly just different in terms of the time that I need to experience it to be able to share, you know, the service or my experience with that service with my readers. I would say, you know, in terms of like what I'm open to with collaboration, I don't think it matters whether it's a physical product or a service. It really just comes down to, is it something that, you know, that I would be interested in whether I blog or not, and if it is, then, you know, then that's something that, you know, would be intriguing to share with readers, and it may just be that the time to review or experience that service would, you know, require a bit more time before I felt like I could accurately and authentically share with readers.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's just the time that extra time is required for sure, because you want it to, if it's a monthly subscription or some kind of weekly service or something like that, you need time to test it out a few times before you can accurately review it.
Good point. Well, I'd like to close with one final question. We've got a viewer in Germany who works with an agency named Stefania. That's her name, not the agency's name. And she kind of asks an open-ended question about where this is all going in the future. Maybe you want to give your sense of where we might be in 5 or 10 years, each of you personally, and give some insight.
Ooh, I'll go first, Merrick. I think that's the magic question. I wish I knew, you know, where we would be in 5 or 10 years. I think we all would, because then we could start planning for it now. But you know, it's interesting to look back from when I started my blog a few years ago and just see how much has changed in the social world. I think that's the space that influences us the most as influencers, because it's always changing. And you know, the more that audiences grow on certain platforms, the more that, you know, those platforms change, and then all of us brands, influencers, and, you know, and the audiences have to adjust to what's happening there. And so I think it's key to just stay aware and engaged in, you know, all of those different areas, and stay on top of what's changing and how it affects you. And I think we'll see, you know, relationships and opportunities evolve with the different spaces that we're all kind of playing in. And you know, especially as you look at this pay-to-play world in social that we've seen, you know, first take place on Pinterest, or on Facebook and Twitter, and then Pinterest, and now Instagram, and it creates an interesting dynamic for all of us to figure out how we, you know, how we fit into all of that as it changes over the years. But I think it's fun, and I think it's exciting, and we're all kind of going through it together. So something to look forward to for sure.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think that the most important thing as influencers and brands is, like Amanda said, just be willing to morph with the changes. And you know, I think that when change comes, most of us, if not all of us, are hesitant about change and worried about change. It was funny to watch Instagram a couple months ago when they were announcing their change to the new algorithm, and I don't even think that most people's have changed yet, but they were calling it the Y2K of Instagram. You know, everyone was panicking and telling people to follow them and use their push notifications and all that, and it just doesn't work like that. You know, you have to be willing to morph and adjust and be happy with the changes and make them work for you. And it is kind of scary to see how we all fit into that and not know the future. But if you're willing to adjust with it, then that's the way that you'll succeed. And you know, I have one little example of that, one bad example. I'm sorry to give so many bad examples, but I'll try to spin it positively here. But there's a agency that I worked with for a little while back, a couple of years ago, kind of a PR agency that they would send out opportunities and say, if you're interested in signing up, click here and apply. And just recently, I don't work with them anymore, but just recently I heard them talking to somebody, and she asked if they had any social media only sponsored opportunities, and they said, we're just not really into that. We try to do just the entire package of blog post and then social shares. And I think that was so detrimental to them, because there are so many influencers out there that don't have blogs, or me as a blogger, I have a blog, but also my influence is completely different on social media, and that's such a opportunity for me to share with an entirely different audience. And so for them to say, we're not really into that, we're not interested in that, is I think foolish for them to not be willing to move forward, because I do sponsored social media posts all the time, and that is a really quick and easy way to reach a lot of people and get your brand out there. And so to completely shut down that opportunity and just say we don't want to do that at all is a huge missed opportunity for them. So I think that if you're willing to look around and see what other people are doing, see what opportunities are out there, and be willing to try things, even if it's risky or new to you, it's worth it, because there are so many different ways to do this, and that's kind of the beauty of what we do, is there's so much creative freedom, and there's so many ways that you can do this. That's why so many bloggers succeed, even though it's such a saturated market, is because everybody has a different voice and everybody figures out a different way to do it. And I think that if you as a brand are willing to explore unlimited amount of options, then you'll really see you'll see the fruits of your labor there. I think that it's important to just try whatever you can, and you'll get the benefit from that.
So maintain flexibility as things change, because that's really the only constant that you've seen thus far.
Right, and things are changing because it works, and because the world is always changing. If we were always unwilling to change, we'd all be stuck with 80s hair and tie-dye or something. And so it's important to be open to change and be willing to try new things, because you never know what better things will come from it. The reason that things change is because they're just trying to make things work better for people and create a bigger community or whatever it is. Instagram wasn't around just a few years ago, and now it's such a huge platform. And if you said, I'm not going to go on Instagram because it's new, you're missing such a huge opportunity. And so I think that being willing and flexible and open to change will be hugely beneficial to you as a brand, as an influencer, as an agency, whatever it is, because those opportunities are there to help you, and these platforms can only make your brand better, I think, if you figure out how to use them wisely, and the only way that you're going to do that is by experimenting and being willing to try.
Really well put. Thank you. Well, we've run a little bit long, but thank you for everybody for attending, and especially for our panelists, Merrick White and Amanda Sanchez. We really appreciate your insights. We've gotten some great comments. This was very insightful and beneficial to everyone, so we really appreciate your time. And with that, this is Silkworm Social and Group High signing off. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.